what happened was there were the first 4 episodes, and the order in which they were filmed in Portmeirion were Arrival, Free for All, Checkmate, Queen's Pawn, which you've just seen, and Dance of the Dead. And then they came back to MGM Studios at Boreham Wood to film the rest, but they felt they were undercrewed, as I understand it. A lot of the material had to be filmed to be projected on the sets while they were shooting. Now, number 2's house, the main control room, all utilised what in those days, we're talking a long time before computer-generated effects, would be done by back projection, that is, projecting onto a screen, but behind the screen so that no actors or activities could be seen in the ray of the projector light, or on a television in, for instance, both number 2's and number 6's house. What they hadn't realised, until it was pointed out to them, I suspect by Pat McGowan, I still don't know, was that you had to have somebody on the set to actually operate this all the time, because it had to be rehearsed. You had to have prints coming in from the lab that were there and ready to be rephotographed. It wasn't done optically in the laboratories, it was actually projected. And when you see them, you've just seen some examples of that in Checkmate. So somebody had to be there who not only was a projectionist, because that's a very specific grade, but somebody who came from the cutting rooms and knew how to order the stuff, to go through the scripts, and to go through the continuity sheets. They're the sheets that are written down by the continuity girl who writes down all of the dialogue and all that is required in a future episode. Props mainly, but also back projection, which was unusual and new, although not new in film. And I don't know how I got the interview for that particular specific, yet unspecified job. I'd worked with Don Chaffee, the director of the first episode of The Prisoner before. We worked on it in the SBC. And I was on the floor a lot with the movie odor, which is the editing device, with the material that they'd shot in Tenerife, which was the location, the volcanic location, that they were matching at Elstree Studios. So I knew Don, well, Don knew me, hierarchy, and he knew I could do that. But I was second assistant on one in the SBC. The first assistant was Bob Dierberg, who was the first music editor on The Prisoner. And he left to go off to be an editor on something for, I think, Jerry Anderson. Excuse me. So I don't know who recommended me, and I still don't know to this day, which I should point out perhaps is actually 50 years later. That's 50 years later. Next year is the 50th anniversary of The Prisoner. I'm amazed to be here. What would be talking about? So I went down for an interview. I was interviewed by Patrick McGowan and, of course, Don Chaffee, although I already knew John. Pat asked me what I'd done, so I told him I'd done a few films. No, before me at the SBC, I was on Othello, the Laurence Olivier Othello, and I was also on the floor with the movie because that was shot in long reels, 10-minute sequences, because it was the play first. So the front and the end of the preceding reel had to be matched on the floor. So I was on the floor on that, which for me was a privilege, but also, importantly, it was the job. So I was known for being from the cutting rooms, but also working on the floor, which, unbeknownst to me, was exactly what The Prisoner needed. Someone who could get this stuff ready, that they'd already shot, who could recognise it in a script, and make sure it was correctly graded to be projected in those episodes. And that was the job. I didn't know that. Nobody told me that at the time. I thought I was going for another assistant editing job. So Pat said, trying to find out, I realised with hindsight whether I'd be prepared to do overtime, because there was a lot of it on that. And he said, what do you do on weekends? So I said, I go to the pictures. He said, you're actually going to see films? Because in England, you see, British technicians that the Goons used to working with don't actually see films or don't know anything about them. It's just a job, you know, like mowing the lawn and working down the factory, which of course MGM was, the nearest factory when you come back from the war. So he'd actually met someone who saw films, and he said, what did you see yesterday? Because it was Monday at the interview. I said, well, I went to an art house in the Barclay in Tottenham Court Road and saw a double bill of De Sica's Il Tetto and Truffaut's Shoot the Pianist. Oh, he fell about laughing. Pat McGowan and he and Don Chaffee, they were laughing, like his arms around him. Oh, yeah. Little did I know that until, and Dave will verify this, that until recently, when Patrick McGowan died, little did I know that one of his favourite directors was Vittorio De Sica, and one of his favourite films was The Roof with Tete. And that's how I think I got the job. So I go back with Bernie Williams, who I think we should pay tribute to because we lost Bernie Williams a few weeks ago, this year. And I thought I was being interviewed for a job as assistant editor. He said, no, we'll call you film librarian, and this is what you do. So that's how I ended up on the prison.
But I'd like to go back to Patrick in a moment and ask you about your relationship with him, but I'll turn to David now. You were also there in 1966, in a very different capacity.
Yes.
And that's where your love for this show began, isn't it?
I think, like many people, we found that Danger Man was something that really captivated us. But Patrick McGowan was an actor capable of portraying great intensity. And a date with Danger Man each week was what most people did, which made Patrick, of course, the highest paid actor.
And that was a far more straightforward spy thriller.
It was. It didn't have the dimensions or the depth that The Prisoner had. And anyway, in 1966, in September, I found myself up here on holiday. I was volunteering on the Festa New York Railway. I opened the paper. There's a picture of Patrick. He's wearing a jacket with piping on, and he's running. So what's all this? The caption said he's making his new series called The Prisoner in Port Merion, and I thought, that's just a mile from here. I'll go over. So I came over and came in. I saw the original Rover, which looked a bit like a kind of Michelin Man affair. And then I saw Patrick and Ronald Brad, George Coullaris, those characters that you've just seen in Checkmate. And there was Angelo Muscat down on the beach, fishing for dabs like that, you see. And I thought, well, what's going on? And they were just taking up the chessboard. And they'd got all the monks marshalled on the piazza where they were about to set up a sequence which I think was for Dance of the Dead.
Which was the next episode.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, actually, it was.
No,
it ended up. It was made after, but shown before. And so I thought, well, this is going to be a series that's a bit different. And I was transfixed by it, as was most of the population. But we were transfixed for different reasons, because many people thought, what is this? What's it all about? It doesn't play straight to the audience. It's got many different levels. Pat McGowan had discovered Port Merion in 1959 when he'd been up here filming for Danger Man, backdrops so that it would appear he was in Italy or China, wherever. He'd fallen in love with it, and he thought, this is the place where we could have our man in isolation, because we wouldn't know where he was in the world. It's so unusual. And, yeah, like most people in 1967, I wanted to know who number one was. Every week we'd meet in the pub. What did you think of it so far? Who's this number one? The guessing game. Then we got Fallout at the end, the majesty of Fallout. For me, the ideal way to wrap up the series, because it was so complex, it defied audience expectation, it threw a gauntlet down and said to the audience, follow that. And I wanted to follow it, but of course it was 1967, how do you do it? It was only in 1976, when the series was re-shown, that I managed to get my name and address broadcast at the end of the last episode, and then the world happened. And within 2 weeks I had 500 letters, and it all just took off from there.
We who were working on it, of course, knew who number one was. Number one was Patrick McGowan. Patrick McGowan would take over from directors. He would be writing episodes. He was even allegedly writing Fallout while they were in Port Merion the first time, so he knew how it was going. He did everything. The basic design was his. He had a great designer in Jack Shampow. He told him exactly what he wanted, and if Pat was behaviour towards towards me was like it was with everybody else. I don't know to believe otherwise. He knew exactly what he wanted, and when he didn't, he knew how to achieve it. And eventually, understandably, and sadly, he took over direction. Those credits you see to people like Joseph Surf, of course, good, and fell out with Don Chaffee, who was his director of choice. They went back to Greyfriars, Bobby, was it? No, the other one, Three Lives of Thomasina, at Disney together. And they were good buddies, and I liked Don. Don really was a character from not just a different world, a different era. He was Elizabethan. He looked like Mrs. Francis Drake. He was tall and he didn't believe in sleeping. And he was a good director. Always said for Britain. He wasn't a studio type director, although Disney used him a lot. He was a very, very good British director with a great eye. And a great buddy of Pat McGurn's, and the fact that they did fall out, and I think this was the very episode that they fell out on, Checkmate, was rather sad for me. Working on Checkmate was kind of interesting because my first feature was Where the Spies Are, when it was called Passport to Oblivion, starring David Niven as Dr. Jason Love, and one of the baddies was an actor I'd never seen or heard of before, who was very impressive, Ronnie Rad, who turned up again in what you've just seen, Rook in Checkmate. And I realised after a while that, hey, all these people had worked before. Dennis Shaw in Checkmate was, of course, an arrival running the village shop. But delve into their filmographies, and both Dennis Shaw and Patricia Jessel worked with Don Chaffee on The Flesh is Sweet, the British ex-film about the pre-Warfing report, prostitution rackets. They'd all known each other. They'd all worked together.
So it was a company.
A village family.
Yes.
And for me, remember, I'm 20 years old. I'm in love with cinema.
We're talking 50 years ago.
And it's a long time. And the film voted the greatest film ever made in the British Film Institute Sight and Sound poll, The Citizen Kane, which featured the Mercury Theatre's actors under Orson Welles. One of whom you've just seen in his dotage, and that's George Coulouris, playing the man with the stick. He is Walter Parks Thatcher, if you notice, on Game Well.
Yes.
And I can't believe I'm working on something with somebody who was in Citizen Kane. So when they came into the studio, because much of Checkmate, after they'd done the initial shoot, Checkmate ran short, so there were new scenes added. And there I am in the studio with the projector sitting next to George Coulouris, Walter Parks Thatcher from Citizen Kane, and the Orson Welles Mercury Theatre. What can I say to him? How can I speak to him? So I look at him, and he's in the blazer with a straw hat. You know. And I'm about to speak to him, and he says, I know what you're going to ask me. I've been introduced, but this is a film, so you do talk to people you're introduced. I said, oh, really? What? He said, you're going to be one of those people who ask me what it's like working on Citizen Kane. Oops, I didn't like to tell him that. So I said, well, I didn't want to, he's act. I don't want to act as upstaging me. So I said, well, I wasn't actually going to ask you that. What I was going to ask you was, it must be amazing, you know, Citizen Kane having been voted the best film of all time, and you are such a prominent player. Was it your own favourite film? Citizen Kane, my favourite film? Of course not. Well, I couldn't resist it. I fell right into the trap, so I had to say, well, what is your favourite film? If it isn't Citizen Kane, he's privileged enough to be in everybody's favourite film. But I didn't say, what is your favourite film? I said, you've never heard of it, California. And that shut me up because he was right, I've never heard of it, it's California.
But it is the film
so I had to go.
in which he has the largest part that he actually ever had.
Yes, he's actually billed, I looked it up much later on, California stars Ray Milland and Barbara Stanwyck. But first listed under the title is George Coulouris, above Anthony Quinn. It's technicolor, he seldom worked in colour.
Talking of colour, that was filmed in colour, but shown in black and white.
Well, we all first saw it in black and white.
Because colour TV didn't come to the UK until 1969, I think.
That's right.
So when you first saw it in black and white, then saw it again in 1976 in colour, that must have been quite shocking.
it was an eye-opener, it was a revelation, because you'd seen this magical series with its baffling questions and all its different levels, and you saw where it was filmed, and you thought, that looks quite beautiful. Of course, we were all conditioned to black and white. So when you then actually see it in colour, talk about leaping off the screen and coming alive, it was just so dynamic. I had the opportunity of meeting Clough Williams-Ellis, who was the designer of Port Merion, and he and I sat through Arrival when it was shown in the town hall, the Hercules Hall in Port Merion. And I said to him afterwards, what did you think of that? He said, that shows Port Merion off to its best advantage. And we all agree with that. Because it's just a world on its own. And I think, although, when the Crystal was first shown in 1967, perhaps for everybody, one person like me, who really thought this was a mould breaker, that this was going to be a classic, there were probably half a dozen people who thought, oh, I don't understand what it's all about, it doesn't make sense, it's not logical, and they just moved on. But when it's shown in colour, it's far more riveting, and I think that's when it really gained momentum and took off.
And when we finally watched them in colour, consecutively, it's got to be the best television show ever.
I'm sure there's many people in the audience that would agree with you there. You mentioned that Checkmate underran slightly in next
52 minutes, yeah.
52 minutes. It needs to be 58 minutes.
That's right.
For ITV. So, talk us through what scenes can you recall was shot again later, because it seems
Not
seamless.
again.
Shot.
The whole ending.
I see.
You just saw the ship and they talked about
that sort of studio.
Pilots,
yes.
Something like that.
So that sort of studio.
But then all the rest was Pat and the stuntmen in the studios.
You would never guess it was a studio. It's seamlessly fitting into everything.
It was beautifully shot, beautifully integrated, and the original editor had gone on to another episode, and a new editor was brought in to finish it. And everything's credited, so I should credit John Smith for the fun of it. And he built it up and said it would be good if we had this extra scene by the river. Now they had that. I don't know if you know that that's a studio, and I think it looks authentic. But the scene by the edge of water might remind you of Free for All, where Eric Portman goes for a walk and is in exactly the same location with exactly the same lighting. Well, Free for All was already finished, or nearly finished by then, so the set was still standing. So they shot all the stuff with Pat and Ronnie Rad to gain a few minutes. John Smith, I think it was, suggested some extra close-ups. More close-ups in this than any other episode. I mean, big close-ups, BCUs. And the whole ending, the fight on the ship, the recovery of the ship, the extra piece of 16mm Wingard on the television, that was added later, and that's how the length was built up, really nearly 5 minutes, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a lot of screen time. Who directed that? Remember, the episode is credited, I think, to Don Chaffee, where they had the falling out. Pat McGowan directed all the additional material as well.
He really was all over executive producer across everything. Did you also know him?
Yeah, I got on with him. I had a funny job. I mean, as long as my stuff was there, they were happy. And we were working Christmas Eve, and there was a scene in Free For All. It was a pick-up shot. It wasn't shot in the bulk of the shooting, that Pat was directing. Directed and redirected a lot of Don Chaffee's stuff, which I think is partly falling out. And it was Christmas Eve. We used to work Christmas Eve in those days, and I think we still do in most places. But we knew we'd have the next day off, and we would have the next 2 days off and we'd come back. So Eric Meyer, the music editor, and I were quite friendly with some girls in some girls in the canteen, and it was Christmas lunch, and we figured we could get free Christmas lunch. And I made absolutely sure that everything that they needed on the studio floor would be there. And there was a projectionist. I was always working with a projectionist. They really didn't need me to take that bit. The projectionist had this. So I went up with Eric and a couple of girls in the canteen, and then Pat shot through lunch. Only Pat McGowan would shoot through lunch Christmas Eve and upset everybody. But he liked doing that. Not that specifically, but he liked upsetting everybody. Felt the work better. And I got called. I got called onto the floor. And I knew nothing was wrong. All the material was graded perfectly. We'd been through the labs. It was lined up. It had the right leaders on, and I'd given the projections the list of what goes where and when they shoot it. So I'm dragged away from this 18-year-old brunette whose top button started undone. And that's the last I saw of her. Pat, which was ironic because I thought it was Pat who sent for me. So I went down onto the floor, studio floor. Really, really unusual. This is an MGM soundstage with a lot going on. And I open the door and it's quiet. I mean quiet. Like that, you can't do anything apart from electrical. This is not how you make movies. I walked towards Pat, who's directing the scene, with Rachel Herbert and the car. And there's the assistant director, whose name was Gino Marotta, and he comes up to me and I listen to the year for it. I think, what? This is Christmas Eve, what? And then I confront Pat and he says, where is it? Where is it? So there's what's always called the director, so shot! Shot we're waiting for. We're all standing around here waiting for the shot. I said, what shot? Is it Rachel? The name of the actress, Rachel. Rachel, and the moke on the screen. And I knew I hadn't ordered it. So I said, it wasn't asked for. Which is true, because if it had been asked for in an earlier continuity sheet, when they shot it, I would have ordered it printed with, we had to have special perforations, and we did for back projection, I would have ordered it, and it would have been there. So I had to say to him, and he stopped. Now, I don't know if you can imagine, because I couldn't, how much it costs when a film stops shooting, let alone a TV show for your grade. Someone, that's why the Dennis said you're for it, I was responsible for stopping. I hadn't supplied the back projection plate that Pat had asked for. So I said, you never asked for it. So he calls over, Doris, continue to go, Doris Martin, there is the sheet. Well, in those days, continuity sheets were typed sheets, and a copy was sent to the cutting rooms, and another copy would be sent to me. So, I don't know what to do. I know I'm about to be fired on Christmas Eve, is all I know. And I'm not strike out, but I can't talk. So I say, well, he's getting Doris. I say, can we, Jeff Fox, the editor, can we ask Jeff to come down and see if we can make it work? You call him, says Pat. So I actually called Jeff Fox and say, Jeff, terrible problem on the floor. Can you come down and look at a shot that we haven't got? And Jeff says, what is it, Tony? It always be nobody's cutting something out. With the shot of Rachel Herbert in the mini-moke on the back projection. I said, well, I can cut to that. I said, Jeff, will you come down and tell Pat that's what you can do? I said, oh, well. So while Doris is looking for the sheet, Jeff is coming down from the cutting room. Doris finds the sheet. On her sheet, it's there listed for printing up. But on my copy, it's not there. If you recall, in those pre-digital days, it was called carbon paper. It went through the first sheet, but the editor's copy didn't come through to the librarian's copy. I had that and it wasn't there. So I've got to show it to him, and I know I'm going to be fired. And in that very moment, Jeff Foot comes onto the stage. And he says to me, what are you stirring for? I said, I pointed the screen, I can't open it. There's nothing on the screen. He said, well, Pat says, well, he just said we can cut to it. Oh, all right, action, everybody. Doesn't say goodbye to me, nothing. So I leave with Jeff, right? And it's Christmas, and I thought it was terrible Christmas for a lot of reasons. So I go back. I clearly haven't been fired, so I have to go back on the day after boxing. And I started shooting at 8:30 in the morning. And I'm going up the cutting room, and that's just past the stage. And outside the stage, there's standing Pat McGrew in costume. Now, Pat was very torn up. I can't avoid it. We last saw each other at that moment when I left with Jeff Foot and he resumed shooting. cannot avoid him as I walk past the stage to get to the cushion. And as I walk towards him, before I could say anything, he puts his arm down and he says, "Gave you a bloody rotten Christmas, didn't it?"
Back to Checkmate, it's regarded as possibly the most memorable episode.
Yes.
Why do you think that is then?
Okay, Checkmate has everything in it that you would say crystallises and is the essence of the prisoner. You've got Portmeirion, which plays really to its strengths there. You've got a human chess game. When we did I think it was our first or second convention, we did a human chess game, and that was photographed and made the front page of the Guardian newspaper. It's very, very photogenic. Pat, incidentally, is very fond of chess. He played chess quite a lot. So what else have you got? You've got Portmeirion, you've got good weather, you've got brightness, you've got colour, you've got the human chess game, you've got good actors, and you've got a first-class script. The script absolutely crackles along. And all the way, as I said to the audience in the prologue, look, there's not a wasted word. Everyone is saying things that are important. Every line has a meaning. You've got the game of chess, and the game of chess mirrors life. And then you've got people who think they're actually playing chess, but they're just pawns. And this was a big thing with Pat McGowan, that we're all pawns, really. We're being moved by others. We think we're in life, but we're not. We're being manipulated by other people, and that's what the chess game symbolises, and you can see it on that level. You've also got the scenes in the laboratory, the psychologist, the Pavlovian stuff. It's all there. It is the iconic, quintessential episode, and then when you get to the end, you get the twist, which really makes it. There's number 6. He's getting in his allies by finding out what the people are like. Are they subservient, or are they in fact more arrogant? And by that he works out who are the prisoners and who are the warders. And of course the twist is that the Rook applies to him his own test. And we were not expecting that when you see it the first time round. So there's a lot in it. And you have to say that, this isn't kind of moving wallpaper stuff, is it? This is the stuff that you want to come back to time and again, because you're always finding things in it. I remember Pat being interviewed and saying, even now, he said, I'm sitting down and I'm still finding new things in it. And that's the reason, ladies and gentlemen, that it is a televisual classic, probably the first one. And here we are, 50 years later, still talking about it. They tried to remake it, or reimagine it as they call it. Thank you very much, audience. But you can't.